Hey folks, this is Vince with Dad's Gaming Addiction, and today we're going to check out Sky Tango. This is a game for 2 to 4 players for ages 8 and up, with the average playtime being about 30 minutes. So Sky Tango is pretty simple. Each player has their own sun row and their own moon row. You can play cards to your own rows, or you can play cards to other players' rows. And your goal is to lay down your cards into your own rows in such a way to where you can score them, basically. And the player with the most points at the end of the game will win. So without further ado, let's just take a quick look at the components and see how the game is played. Okay, so as far as your components and game setup, we'll start with the box. Nothing too fancy here. What's weird about it, though, is that the cards fit like this. There's actually some room here, and I just find this to be a very odd design. I guess the box could have been smaller, I think. It's nothing, you know, game-breaking or anything, but it could have been smaller. Okay, so here's your manual. You've got 4 pages on this side, 4 pages on this side. Okay, nothing fancy there. You've got a deck of cards, and the way to set up the game, you just simply shuffle it, and each player receives 5 cards to form their starting hand. One addendum I just want to make to the opener of this video. I mentioned that the game is for 2 to 4 players. What I don't know is if those 4 players can play solo, as in not paired off into teams. The manual says here 4 players. Players sitting opposite are partners. So it seems like the players, per the manual, are forced to pair off into teams if there are 4 players. Whether or not you can play solo or not with 4 players, I don't know. The manual does not say anything about it. So I have not personally tried a 4-player game. I've only done 2 players. So that's what I have set up right now, 2 players. And I'm assuming you could do solo with 3. Obviously, you have to do solo with 3 because, you know, having 2 players control their own sun and moon row and then 1 player controlling their own sun and moon row is kind of silly. So yeah, just experiment at your own risk and something to be aware of. Okay, so here is a 2-player game setup. You shuffle the deck of cards. Each player receives 5 cards to form their starting hand. Okay, so to illustrate what a player's turn might look like, I went ahead and just threw some cards down. This is not actual gameplay, just for example purposes. So on a player's turn, they can do one of 2 things. They can play a single card into a row, or they can clear some cards and put them into their victory point pile, not both. Now, let's just go ahead and take a look at the first action, which is play a single card. You can play a card into one of your own sun rows or into one of your own moon rows. Each player can only have one of each row. You can also play a single card onto one of your opponent's rows. Now, you're probably wondering, why would you want to help out your opponent? Well, these cards have to be in ascending order. They don't have to be in consecutive order. Like, it doesn't have to be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There can be gaps in between them, but they have to be in ascending order. Whenever you put a card down, it has to be on one of the ends or on top of an eclipse card, which I'll get to in a minute. But in this case, if we take a look at this player's hand and he wants to play a card to his moon row, he wouldn't be able to do it because, well, he only has an eclipse card. If you try to play this 21 here, he could not put it over here because it's not in ascending order. Here's a 26. Over here is a 4. And again, this would not be in ascending order. You cannot place cards in between other cards, so you're kind of stuck with what you have going on here. Now, you can play cards to your opponent's row, like I said, in order to mess them up. So if they have like a low number, you could play a high number right next to it, and they'd be kind of stuck because they wouldn't be able to play anything in between those 2 numbers. So, yeah, you can play a single card on your turn, or you can also play an eclipse card on your turn. The solar eclipses have to be played on the sun row, and the lunar eclipses have to be played on the moon row. And the reason why you'd want to do that is to fix huge gaps. So let's say here that here's a good example, the 9 and the 23. That is a pretty big gap. So what I could do is I could play a solar eclipse on that 23. Now I'm freed up to put something on top of this on a future turn, say the 15, and then I'd have a little bit more leeway. I could play the 16 or the 17 or the 18 after that, as opposed to being stuck with only being able to play 24 and up on this 23. So you can play solar eclipses on your own rows in order to help yourself out and, possibly improve your chances of laying down more cards. Or, again, you can play these eclipses onto your opponent's rows in order to stop them from scoring. Now, let's just say that on a previous turn, let's just say this wasn't here. Let's say on a previous turn I had this, and then on the next turn I had this. Now I've got 5 cards in a row. So on the following turn I can take that second action I was talking about. That second action is to score cards. Whenever you have 5 cards like this in a row without being interrupted by an eclipse, like if this were here, this would not be considered scoring because scoreable because this solar eclipse is in the way. But if we have 5 cards that are like this, and there's no interruption between them, we can go ahead and take all 5, clear them out, and then you put them into like a victory point pile for endgame scoring. In the event you've got something like this going on, you end up playing a card that creates a row of 5, and then on a future turn you go ahead and score those 5 cards, and it could be more than 5 if you manage to get it that way. But you'll take all the cards again, and put them into your victory point pile. Anytime there is a gap, you'll just go ahead and slide the cards over so that they form one complete row again. On the subject of drawing cards happens at the beginning of your turn when you are out of cards. Usually in other card games, like when you play a card at the end of your turn, you get to draw a card in order to bring your hand back up to a certain limit. Well, in this game, that does not happen. Basically, players just keep playing cards. They play a card, they end their turn, or they score and they end their turn. At the beginning of their turn, if they have no more cards, they can go ahead and draw cards from the deck in order to bring their hand back up to 5 cards again. Now, the game ends when a player goes to reach for cards and there's no more cards available. At that point, each other player gets one more turn to lay down cards or to score cards, whatever the case may be, and then players will take a look at their victory pile to see how many points they've accumulated. Scoring is pretty easy. You'll give yourself 1 point for every numbered card in your victory point pile. Eclipses are worth nothing, but you'll give yourself 1 point for each number card in your victory point pile. Then you'll take away 1 point for each numbered card that is currently sitting in your rows and in your hand. Once you total that up, that's how many points you get, and the player with the most points will win the game. Okay, so there you have it, a very brief look at Sky Tango. It's worth stressing that I did not cover all of the rules found in the manual. This was just to give you a general overview so that you could see how the game was played. I didn't even touch on what a total eclipse was, which is basically if a player cannot make any plays whatsoever, they cannot pass in this game. So if they can't make any plays with the cards in their hand, they have to discard everything. The cards in their hand and the cards that are out in front of them on both rows, and then they'll start fresh with 5 new cards. So there's that, and there's some other rules, again, that I didn't touch on. But for the most part, it's a pretty casual game. I mean, it's still strategic in the sense that you're trying to, put cards down in ascending order while trying to mess up your opponent, while trying to do a little damage control and try and clean up anything that your opponent might have done to you. So there is some strategy in this game, although it's a pretty light one. The cards are good quality, and they shuffle well despite the fact that they're shaped very oddly. Instead of them, being like regular cards, they've got this long rectangular shape about them. Again, the box doesn't make much sense, but I'm not going to harp on that too much. The rules, I think, could be a little bit more clear in some places. Like, I don't know what it is about the manual, but I think it's like, I think it's a little scatterbrained. Like, some rules are covered here when they should be covered here, and some things are laid out in a particular way that I don't like. For whatever reason, the manual is a little confusing. The rules aren't hard, really, but the manual, I think, could do a better job and be better organized. But other than that, it's a pretty good filler, or, if you just, want to play a family game on, family game night, this will take about a half an hour to get through. If you guys want to see my full written review, you can, www.dadsgamingaddiction.com. If you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel. That way you can keep up to date with any new content I happen to publish. This is Vince, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.